just to very quickly recap, we covered architecture's politics, and then we connected that to who actually makes up the discipline. That education is taught by people, curriculums are put together by people, buildings are designed by people, and so it is very inflected, very highly influenced by who is doing all of that, right? Who is doing the speaking, who is doing the writing, who is doing the teaching, who is doing the building. And given that the architectural profession is very untransformed, that Black Africans or Black South Africans in general are very poorly represented, their experiences of the country and their experiences of society and whatever they may be, but those issues and those concerns and those experiences will have very limited space for any kind of authentic expression, because that is not really the voice of the architectural profession. So we connected the politics with agency, with people, with the representation in the discipline itself. This is not entirely new to you, because we did speak about this before. In second year, we discussed in our introductions to history and theory, we discussed the work of, I mentioned a few architectural historians from the 1890s and early 1900s that have been very foundational to architecture curricula around the world. And I mentioned a few of them, but today I'm just going to mention one of them, which we discussed a lot, which was Sir Bannister Fletcher, a London-based architect in the 1890s and early 1900s, and he produced this really authoritative, in other words, highly influential text on a history of architecture, which was then used all over the British Empire, and it became a foundational text for architectural curricula. And we also discussed earlier in this year how this was a foundational text in South Africa as well, right? When architecture schools started to be established in the 20th century in South African universities. So the point there I'm making is that the link between a particular kind of politics, a particular kind of outlook, is linked to who is doing the writing, who is doing the speaking. Okay, those links are there, and we're gonna now carry this point. We covered this in second year, right? That's Bannister Fletcher, and that's the cover of the book. In its earlier versions, it's now in, I forget how many editions it's now, but they're still producing revisions of this book. It remains a authoritative and standard text. And we went through this in a lot of detail. We analyzed this cover, we analyzed the opening images, we analyzed the structure of the text, and how a very Euro and American centric it is. We looked at how he divided the book up, between Euro-American architecture, which takes up the great bulk of the book, and then a thin part at the end, which is all non-American or non-Western architectures, which he didn't regard as very relevant to even talk about at all. And this is me holding the book, and just making this very tangible. So that end of the book there, which is all non-Euro-American architecture, is this little piece I'm holding here, right? It's a tiny little percentage of the book. And we covered this in detail. So this is Euro-America, and this is the rest of the world. And the point is made, you can't miss it. It's explicit from the end of the book to the end of the book. The point is that these voices don't really matter a heck of a lot, okay? And he tells us exactly what he means. And he says here, these developed mainly on their own account, and exercise little direct influence on other styles. They can thus be studied independently and need not interrupt the story of the evolution of European historical architecture, which would probably be the case if they were placed in chronological order. The position they should occupy in a history of architecture is, however, a matter of doubt, but it is thought that by keeping them quite separate from the historical styles, it will make for greater clearness to the student, right? So he says here that he deliberately has not arranged the book in chronological order, but arranged it according to these categories he comes, which he calls historical and non-historical, which basically means Euro-American and non-Euro-American, non-Western, the majority world. He divides them up like that. And he says that the reason he does that is because if he puts them in chronological order, the reader won't be able to tell what is important and what is unimportant. So he separates them so he could put the unimportant material at the end, and that the reader will be, it will be very clear to the reader that these are quite irrelevant materials. Okay, so that's quite explicit. So if text were written like this today, can I open it up to a little bit of a discussion? If text were written like this today, what would you guys think about it?
Hello.
Hello there.
Hi. I would think that it would kind of like if there isn't like this today, there'd be a bit of a problem, but like highlighting the fact that it's mostly Eurocentric and all that. But I think it also align with the fact that, as you can see right now, with how the world is, there's all these marches and all these highlights about different races and which races deserve to be treated equally. I think it would fit in, but in a negative light. It would kind of push the stereotype that Europeans are more sophisticated or important and Africans are a bit behind, or any other country that's not America, or any other continent that's not the Americas or the European continent kind of fall behind. So it kind of fits the context of where we are today and how history has worked out to what we are today.
So you're saying, if I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying it's not acceptable, but it wouldn't be surprising. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I know. It wouldn't be surprising at all. Like, it wouldn't be acceptable, but it's the way the world is geared. It wouldn't be acceptable, but it's not surprising. No one would do anything to fight it because the superpowers are the ones writing it. So who's gonna fight?
Yes. So I mean, yeah, that's a good point. That it wouldn't be good, but it wouldn't be surprising. Okay. But I want you to also think of not just a global context, you know, because when we speak of the West, it seems as if, where's the West? You know, is that like across the Atlantic Ocean? Is that what we mean? It might seem very far away, almost abstract because it's so far away. But you must also put it in a South African context. Okay. What if texts like this are written today in South Africa? So if this were written in South Africa today, so let's say this is Bannister Fletcher is writing about the whole world, which is just amazing. That just an amazing endeavor to believe that a single individual could do something like that, could grasp the architecture of the whole world and categorize it in that way. That is itself a great act of imperial arrogance, one could almost say. But that was 100 years ago. So let's say today, 100 years later, in South Africa today, let's say we have a book of architecture about architecture covering several decades in South Africa. And we have a book organized, maybe not organized like that, but let's say black writers or black architects constitute that bit of the architectural profession. And all of this is white authors and white architects. And this book, we are told, represents architecture in South Africa. What would you guys think about that?
Sorry, Tariq.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, but I think it has come to be a norm for us to basically read more or understand more about Western culture or architecture. So it wouldn't be a surprise as much, but I don't think we'll do anything. It would be just it has come to be a norm. So I don't think there's a huge difference at that. As much as they've accepted it 100 years back, I think we would have accepted it now.
Okay, that's not Clancy.
Yes.
So yes, okay. So you're making the same point that it's really a distorted discipline, and a discipline that is really out of you can turn your audio off if you like, that is not very reflective of its society, and in fact, as we said last time, is the inversion of its society. But what we're going to do is I want you to now understand, because we're moving now into specific architectural texts now. So these, we're going to look today at this one particular text, which we've mentioned before. 10 years, 100 buildings. It is the largest, most it's become like authoritative, and it's certainly the thickest book and the most amount of buildings and contributors that South African architecture has produced. Okay, it is the most authoritative compilation, both buildings as well as contributors that we have had in South Africa. So it's a major text, and we're going to look at this text through our lenses, through the observations we've made so far. And we're going to continue with part 3 of our work that we've been discussing, learning to speak. And the idea I want to introduce you to now is authorship. Okay, authorship. Things have authors, you know. If you pick up any book, it has an author. And any novel, any biography or whatever, it has an author. And similarly is the case with architectural texts. An architectural text has an author. A building has an author. You know, the architect who designed it, that is the author building. You know, things have authorship. Yeah, it's one needs to understand where our ideas come from. They come from somewhere. Ideas have a lineage. They're connected to their society. They're connected to their context. So let's read here about authorship. And this is following on from our previous lectures. And also these things, you know, just to a leading in observation before we get into it. These things are, as I've said, they're never really discussed. Okay, these kinds of ways of really looking very, very closely at how the architectural discipline has been made up and put together. Very rarely, if ever, are these things actually discussed. But it's necessary to actually understand why you are being taught the things that you are being taught, how we got to this point, and what works and what doesn't work, and what is the structure of our discipline, and what is holding it back. So let's start reading. With minor professional representation by those previously disadvantaged in the discipline, by extension, scholarships could not be from this question of representation. right? So in other words, when you look at who makes up architects and who is building, you know, that those same distortions are going to be reflected also in academia and also in scholarship, right? So the same distortions that you see in who is building and who makes up architects are the same distortions you're going to see in who is writing and who is publishing, you know, right? They are part of the same architectural body, right? So the same a minor representation of those previously disadvantaged is going to be extended into universities and the academy and scholarship. Although academia rarely, if ever, is inclined to acknowledge the nature of that social reality. Okay, so you will go through your whole education and no one's actually ever going to say that to you. Okay, but the professional space is reflected in the academic space, is reflected in the scholarship space. Okay, although academia rarely, if ever, is inclined to acknowledge that it is a very poor reflection of its social reality. Okay, so here I'm going to go into talking about this text, 10 Years, 100 Buildings, with over 30 contributors and edited and convened by Professor Aura Gibert, who we mentioned before. It's a massive text, right? At 448 pages. It's massive, okay? Showcasing 115 selected build projects over 15 years and 37 text contributors representing invited writers and academics from across the country. So writers were invited to contribute from all over the country, amounting to 37 of them. 10 Years, 100 Buildings, subtitled Architecture in a Democratic South Africa, published in 2009, was the most significant compendium of contemporary South African architecture published to date. Yet out of its 37 invited contributors, only 3, approximately 8% of the book, were not white. One of whom was the SACAP president contributing an obligatory foreword, right? Only 3 out of 37 were not white. Moreover, of the 115 built projects showcased in the volume, approximately only 7 projects, 6%, were led by an architect who was not white, and hence able to exert any substantial influence on the project. So we're dealing with a incredible distortion here. Only out of the 37 contributors, only 3 people writing this book, 3 out of 37. These 37 are invited, and only 3 of them were not white in South Africa. And out of 115 built projects, only about 7 had a black architect. So these are incredibly distorted figures, yet they are, as you all observed, they are our norm in South Africa. Okay, so both the people building and both the people writing about the building is the complete inversion of South African society. So I mean, whoever you are, wherever you are, these figures are just extreme. You know, the normality is an extreme. You know, it's not like there's normal and then there's an extreme on either end of the spectrum. The norm is an extreme. And we saw it when we spoke last time, that similar figures are, similar proportions, similar ratios are evident in figures of representation in the UK and in the US as well. Our ratios, our demographic ratios are very similar, except we're in Africa, and which makes it so much more alarming for us. So this is the extreme of our normality. Okay. Architecture has an authorship. Okay. It doesn't come out of nowhere. And we can see the severely distorted kinds of authorship that we have. Okay. And this is going to have huge implications, which we're going to get to. It's not insignificant. The implications are really vast and far-reaching. Such extremes within the demographic breakdown of selected projects and invited authors and voices reveal something of the skewed normalities, colonialities, and cognitive dissonances within the architectural status quo, right? So as you all observed, this is a skewed normality. It's very skewed. I mean, I don't think anyone can doubt that this is something extremely skewed. I've been reading from this, and yeah, we just read that first paragraph, focusing on 10 years, 100 buildings, 37 contributors, and 115 built projects, but only 8% of the contributors and only 6% of the projects are by an author or architect who is black or is not white. Okay, so those are the extremes and the skewed normalities within our norm and our status quo. So let's carry on reading here. Such extremes within the demographic breakdown of selected projects and invited authors and voices. Remember, these are not just stats, they are people speaking. They are voices, they are authors, they are writing, they are building, right? So representation is connected to authorship, connected to who is speaking, who is shaping the discipline, right? We're not just talking, although one can put a 6% and an 8%, but these are human beings we're talking about, who have agency, who have voices, who have experiences in the world. We're talking about voices and people. Such extremes within the demographic breakdown of selected projects and invited authors and voices reveal something of the skewed normalities, the colonialities. Colonialities means how colonialism still lives in the present day, how the structures and systems that were set up before are still structures and systems which we deal with today, which we can see very clearly, right? This is a coloniality. In other words, it is a skewed norm reflecting a colonial society, yet we are a post-colonial society. We still have this structure, right? That's called a coloniality. In other words, it's how colonialism lives in the present day. That's called coloniality. And cognitive dissonances. Cognitive dissonance, it means when it's a term from psychology, that it means when you have a particular, say one has a particular view of what reality is, but then you get information that says it's not like that, but you believe it is like that. That's called a cognitive dissonance. It means the evidence is saying something different to what you want to believe in, right? So we all, as South Africans, we want to believe that we have that our society is that we have moved on from all kinds of disproportionate and oppressive and systems, and that in our context, that our disciplines for us as architects, that our disciplines have also been transformed, and they are no longer structured in such unequal and marginalizing ways and oppressive ways. In the past, it has also been quite oppressive. When we looked at how in the first semester, how South African cities were created and the kinds of ideas that were behind them in the architectural and planning profession, very often quite dehumanizing ideas that people were often dealing with. So this is a cognitive dissonance. It means that here in post-apartheid, post-colonial, democratic South Africa, we have moved on from all of this stuff. All of that is in the past now. But look at this. What is this if it is not a coloniality? I mean, is that democratic? Is that multicultural? Is that diverse? I mean, these are the words by which we describe our society. Yet the evidence says it's not like that. That's called a cognitive dissonance, right? It means that the narrative and the stories we tell ourselves are not actually reflected in our social reality. There is a disjuncture between them, and that's called a cognitive dissonance. It means you're going to find ways to explain that away, so that we can hold on to a narrative that we're actually multicultural. That's a cognitive dissonance. It's about squaring a circle. How do you hold two things that are in fact the opposite of each other at the same time? You know, so the whole South African society is full of cognitive dissonances, and our disciplines are full of cognitive dissonances. There are things we say, but the evidence in reality points to something else. So we are always trying to square the circle, to say our society is this, but actually the reality is that. And we hold both of these conflicting views at the same time. That is a cognitive dissonance. So we have a skewed normality, we have colonialities, and then we have cognitive dissonances, okay, within the architectural status quo. The total practical detachment from such concerns, from all of this stuff, and the total practical detachment from all of that stuff is all the more bewildering given that multiculturalism and diversity occupy and are celebrated as central themes in the publication and in South African architecture in general, right? So this book, this huge book, 10 Years, 100 Buildings, diversity and multiculturalism are central themes throughout the book. They are celebrated. They celebrate how multicultural and diverse South African society is, and how multicultural and diverse South African architecture is. And yet, look at how this book is made. Look at who makes up this book. So this is a cognitive dissonance. The authors are claiming multiculturalism and diversity for architecture, as it is claimed in South African society at large. But the structure of the discipline is not like that at all. The structure of the discipline still is a continuity of colonialism in the way it's made up, and who is speaking and who is not speaking, right? That's called a cognitive dissonance. So this is a extreme cognitive dissonance we're seeing right here in front of us, in this authorship, in this book, and in our architecture. Such abstractions and cognitive dissonance. Abstraction meaning we're taking multiculturalism and diversity as abstract concepts, not as real social. This is a real social stuff we're dealing with. These are abstract concepts. So what the book does is it talks in abstract terms, but it disconnects it from the real social world, right? So it's an abstraction. Such abstractions and cognitive dissonances with what is in effect a normalized condition of coloniality. A normalized condition of coloniality. This is further evident in that neither the authors, all 37 of them, nor those who have appraised the award-winning publication. The book has received high praise, and it's won awards. Neither the authors nor those who have appraised the work with awards have even noticed such extreme distortions, or even found them in any way problematic. It's so normal that it's not even noticed anymore. It's not even noticed that this is an extreme distortion and is really not compatible with what we wish to see. If it is multicultural and diversity, which we truly wish to see, there doesn't seem to be any awareness of how far we are from that, actually, because these extreme distortions have become our normality, and we speak in abstract ways about things. Let's read on. So that's one publication, 10 years, 100 buildings. And we'll return to it every now and again because it's such a major text. So let's move on. What about other publications? Is it just this publication? Unfortunately, it's not just this publication. It is basically what our publications look like. It's illustrative of a broader pattern. So suffice to say that other publications on South African architecture fare little better. For example, similar observations were made in an important peer review of South African built environment journals conducted by the Academy of Science of South Africa in 2018. Right. So in 2018, this scientific organization did an important peer review of South African journals in the built environment in 2018. I'm not going to pull it up now, but I will share it with you. It's really useful. It is various people reviewing our architecture and other built environment journals. And it's really useful to read it. So I'm going to quote a little bit from that review. In almost a century of the journal's existence, the Architecture South Africa Journal, right? So, which is the main journal of South African architecture, which is published about every second month, and it's been in existence for about 100 years or so. This is our main source of publishing for architecture in South Africa, this journal. In almost a century of the journal's existence, this peer review represented the first independent peer review of the Architecture Essay Journal, which is the journal of the South African Institute of Architects. So you should all become familiar with this journal. I sent you a link with, because a few years ago they started putting the PDFs online. The journal as a PDF online, and I sent you the link for that, and hopefully you guys checked it out. So among several recommendations put forward by this peer review to seriously consider implementing, the review panel identified that, so this is the review panel, which is made up of several experts in the architectural field. The review panel stated about the architecture, the Journal of South African Architecture. It said, the reviewers said, the predominance of a few individuals, in other words, the few individuals who are publishing in this journal, it's not many people publishing. The people writing in the journal are a small number of people that publish over and over and write articles over and over. The predominance of a few individuals neither reflects nor affirms the diversity of this transforming context. There is a need for an open, transparent call so that contributions better represent diverse demographics. Right? So journals have an open call. It means they announce that we're covering these themes, or they announce that this is how you can submit things. The Architecture South Africa Journal doesn't even have an open call. It's really people sort of knowing one another, you know. They say this is not on. You actually need to have an open, transparent call, which would help to diversify the journal. They also go on to say, urgent improvement in the diversity of perspectives is required, right? So this is a scientific peer review, right? So, and they are stating the obvious. They looked at this journal and they looked at the people writing in it, and they said, it does not reflect our society. There has to be urgent improvement to change this. Okay. And let's read on. So we looked at this main book, 10 Years, 100 Buildings. Other publications, little different and little better. We're looking at the journals, a peer review of the journal, same thing, same problems. So let's move on. Publications apart. The hegemonic condition of constituents and authors. Hegemony means when there's a dominance that is reflected in many different spheres and spaces, right? That's called a hegemony. That's a nice academic word. That it's an important word to know, a hegemony. So in other words, the same dominance that is reflected in the representation of who makes up the architectural discipline is the same dominance reflected in this book, 10 Years, 100 Buildings, is the same dominance reflected in the journals, is the same dominance we're now going to find reflected in the boards and committees which make up the South African Institute of Architects, right? This is what a hegemony is. The same thing is reflected in whatever sphere and space you're moving in the discipline. The same forms of dominance, the same kinds of power relations are reflected over and over and over again in whatever spaces you're moving. That's called a hegemony. That's the academic word for it. This hegemonic condition of constituents and authorship is also reflected in, there are many boards and committees all across the country that make up the South African Institute of Architects. In other words, people who make up the various portfolios, make up the various committees, you know, have meetings, etc. It is also reflected in how the institute is made up, right? Which likewise, so these boards and committees likewise are largely and usually entirely white, right? As facts of demographics, these observations are beyond dispute. No one can really contest these figures. They are black and white. Oh, maybe I shouldn't say black and white, but they are. I suppose they are black and white in a way, but they are clear. They are undisputable. Okay, even though some may find them alarming, given their relative scarcity in scholarship and taboo in public discourse, right? So these things are really beyond dispute. The figures, the stats, the review of the scientific committee, the journal, etc., the makeup of SIRE, they're beyond dispute. They are clear, you know. But people, and maybe even if you hear it for the first time, you might be alarmed by that, you know. Or and it's also a taboo. You don't really talk about these things in public. Yet they are so clear, and they're a hegemony. They run through the whole discipline in whatever spaces you're moving through. Okay. So these are, I mean, and you all intuitively knew that already when I asked you. You said this is the norm, and it's not a good norm, but it's the norm. It's what we expect, and it doesn't surprise us. So you see how it really is a norm, how it extends through the publications and the institute, etc., etc. What requires much greater expanding upon, however, are their vast and little appreciated implications, some of which are addressed in the remainder of this text. So yeah, we're actually just talking about figures, who people are that are talking, who are the voices that are speaking, who are the authors that are writing, right? But this is not just a question of representation. It has vast implications. It has implications for the kind of architecture that is built, the kind of education that you receive, the kind of curriculum that you have, etc., etc., etc. It has vast implications. So it's not happy reading, and it's some of you might find it a little bit uncomfortable, but we are trying to understand our discipline. Okay. And it's not always going to be happy reading. It's not always going to be things that we're always comfortable with. But it is our reality, and therefore we have to understand it. We can't look the other way. Looking the other way is actually going to be very counterproductive to us. Because if we want to move forward and we want to change our discipline in a positive way, you first have to know what the problem is, right? Then you can address the problem. If you don't know what the problem is, what are you going to do? You know, if you go to a doctor, if you're sick and you go to a doctor, the doctor needs to know what's wrong. He has to diagnose you so that he can give the medicine that you need. If you don't go to a doctor and you don't know what's wrong with you, and you just chug something down your throat out of the medicine cabinet in the bathroom or wherever it is, you don't know what effect that's going to have. It could be counterproductive. You could be doing more damage because you don't really understand the issues, right? So if some of these things are uncomfortable, what can I do? I didn't make architecture the way that it is. I just want us to understand it. And when we understand it, we can actually make strategic interventions. We can know where we can change things, or where we need to change things, and that we don't reproduce the worst things, which is the worst thing, to reproduce the worst things without knowing. Another question from Ndamo. Does SAIA have some sort of time frame that after such a time we should have an architectural book published or not? Don't know if my question is out of context. Can you explain? Because I don't understand the question completely. Does SAIA have some sort of time frame after such a time that we should have an architectural book published? Yeah, I don't know which architectural book or by whom that you're referring to. I don't think SAIA is planning to have any book published. So the journal is the SAIA journal, right? The South African Architecture Journal that comes out every second month, that is SAIA's journal. That is the journal of the South African Institute of Architects. So they regularly have a publication. Every second month, SAIA has a publication. And we read the peer review of that publication. And the publication is also part of a hegemony. It also reflects the same distortions that are reflected everywhere else. And in SAIA itself, in the makeup of SAIA as well, right? So I don't know if I've answered. Okay. Fatima says, I don't think it's uncomfortable. It's important for us to learn about these matters, hopefully with the intention to change the future. Yes, that is the intention, especially in our discipline at UJ. The mentality needs to change, and all races need to be accepted equally. Yes, that's the narrative we tell ourselves. That's the narrative that's what we want to believe. That's what we want to have. We want to have equality, and we want to have diversity, and we want to have other people's experiences and voices that are brought forward, which will change the very character of our discipline if that happened. It will change the very makeup of our education. It will change the curriculum you guys are taught if that happened. But that is our cognitive dissonance, that it isn't like that, So what we have and what we want are in many ways far away from one another, okay? And so we have a kind of a dissonance. We're holding two opposing views, and we're all, psychologically squaring the circle between what we believe and what we actually live in our social world.
I don't know if also this is like out of topic or something, but like I wanted to just like in terms of like publishing like any book, does it also have to go through like SACAP, SAIA for them to check it first before you publish it, or people can just like as an architect, can you like write your own book and just like publish it, like having to go through those stages and all that?
No, you don't have to. The South African Institute of Architects publishes its own journal, right? But you as an architect, you don't have to go through them to publish. You have to go through SACAP to practice. But to publish, no, anybody can publish. You just have to have a publisher that is willing. You have to write, and the publisher publishes it. That's, I mean, there's a process that goes into publishing, but it doesn't have anything to do with SIRE. SIRE can have absolutely nothing to do with what you publish.
Okay, so.
Okay, Sibusiso says, would there be a difference if the contributors were selected or volunteered, since we have few black architects? Yeah, look, so there are so few black architects, but they weren't selected to write about it, and the built work by black architects weren't selected either, and maybe they have some reasons for not doing that, and I'm not going to go into what their reasons may or may not be, because we were not the ones who did that selection. But we are looking at the end result, the end effect. We're looking at the contributors who were selected, nearly 40 of them, and almost all of them are white architects, right? And we're looking at the buildings that they selected, which are about 115, and almost every single one has a white architect. So we don't have to go into what is going into every person's mind. That's not our job. But we can pick up the patterns. We can observe. That is beyond dispute. And it is a pattern that I said is a hegemony. It's a hegemonic process. It is the same skewed normality that is reproduced in every space. That's the patterns. Okay, any other questions? What we're going to go on to do is to look at the consequences and the implications of authorship in our next lecture, right? So you can, I hope you see all the strands coming through, right? How we have a particular kind of politics, how it is reflected in the representation, how it is connected to who makes up the profession, how who makes up the profession is connected to authorship, connected to who is writing, who is speaking, who is publishing in our journals, who is building, right? It's one thing after another. We see the same patterns running through everything. The continuity runs through many different spheres and spaces. And where we're going to go from here is to look at authorship. We're going to now go much deeper into authorship and understanding that the position that you have in society is going to affect the way that you write about society and your place in it, which is sort of stating the obvious in a way. So, let's just give one or two extreme examples, just so you can get the point of what I mean. If you are a high-ranking executive in a particular company, let's say, some huge supermarket chain or whatever that has dominates the retail sector, and you write about your society, it's going to reflect your position in that society, your concerns, your interests, your fears, your prejudices, all of your anxieties, or it's going to come through in the way you describe your society. On the other hand, if you're, let's say you're a domestic worker living in Diepsloot, and you have to catch 3 taxis before the sun rises in the morning to go work in the home of a family living in one of Joburg's suburbs, and then you get back home and as the sun is going down, and you have, you know, 2 or 3 children you have to put through school and pay school fees for, and put food on the table, and, you know, pay a minimal rent, and you're receiving a salary every month that you can't even live off, right? Domestic workers in South Africa receive a salary that they can't live off, which is called a poverty wage. It means you're working just like everyone else is working, but the salary you earn is not, you can't survive on that, right? So many people in South Africa receive poverty wages. They work, but they can't survive off the salary that they earn. So it means that their work and their salary condemns them to a condition of poverty. This is the case of many South Africans. Some don't even have, many don't even have work, and many who do also earn poverty wages. Now, if you're this executive at this national, say international supermarket chain, and you're this other woman, this domestic worker with 3 kids and taking 3 taxis and da 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 da. Now, if you speak about your society, you're speaking from a completely different position in that society. And the things that are going to concern you, the things that you live every day, that you experience every day, the struggles you have, the challenges you have, the fears you have, the worries you have, whatever it might be, it's going to reflect your position in that society, is going to affect your voice, right? Your if you wrote, you know, the things you say, it's going to be inflected in there. Absolutely, it is going to be. This is what we are speaking about. This is what is called authorship, right? So it means that architectural education is authorship. Building architecture out there in the world is authorship. They have authors. And those authors have a particular positionality in their society, right? Like our supermarket exec or like our domestic worker. That's just 2 extreme examples I'm giving you just to make the point. So architecture also has authorship. Our publications have authorship. Our journals have authorship. What you are taught in your courses in the university, all of it has authorship. And that authorship is going to, and it's unavoidable, it's going to reflect people's positions in their society, unavoidably, okay? And it's going to affect what we build, it's going to affect how we think, what we write, what concepts we use, what themes we use, what curriculums you guys are taught, etc., etc. All of it is going to be inflected because all of it is authorship, okay? And that we're going to speak about going forward, architectural authorship. And we're going to go quite deeply into that. So we've been going on for like over an hour, I think. So I'm going to call it a day there.